I was just watering my lawn, minding my business, when this woman walks up, points at my driveway and says, "That's mine now." I thought she was crazy. But what she did next, it nearly cost me everything, and no one saw it coming. After 30 years of early mornings, long shifts, and sacrificing the little luxuries most folks take for granted, I finally had something to call my own. My dream wasn't flashy. No marble countertops, no pool in the backyard, no fancy alarm system that talked to my phone. It was just a single-story home tucked away in a quiet little cul-de-sac, where the streetlights hummed at night and the mailboxes all leaned the same way, like they were nodding to each other in neighborly respect. I'd worked my fingers to the bone in the trades, kept my head down, paid my taxes, and lived the kind of life that wasn't loud, but was honest. This house, with its blooming dogwoods and the stone path I laid by hand over 3 weekends of sweat and sore knees, was the payoff. My corner lot gave me just enough space to breathe, space to tend to my lawn on Saturday mornings, sip coffee on the porch with the sun warming my face, and finally feel like I'd earned a little peace. The neighborhood was decent too. Retirees, who still flew the flag, young couples trying to build a future, a few Vietnam vets who nodded at you like they knew something the rest of the world forgot. Folks waved, made small talk about the weather, offered a hand if your mower stalled or a storm knocked down a branch. It was the kind of community where people still remembered how to be neighbors. But every good street has that one house, that one person who doesn't just live there, they watch, and not in the friendly I've got your back kind of way. More like a hawk circling above, waiting for something to go wrong. Her name was Karen. And no, I don't mean that as a joke or a stereotype. Her name was literally Karen. She lived 2 doors down and wore that position like a badge of honor. Self-proclaimed eyes and ears of the HOA. She walked the neighborhood in her pristine white sneakers, clipboard in hand, as if she were the mayor of the block. At first, I chalked it up to harmless routine. Every place has someone like her, the kind who notices if your trash bins are out an hour too long or if your grass has crept a half-inch over regulation height. The kind who complains when your truck sticks out too far on the curb, or if your American flag is a bit too faded. But I let it go. Live and let live, right? I didn't move into this home to fight battles. I moved in for peace. I dealt with worse during my years on job sites, in unions, working under foremen who barked orders like drill sergeants. A nosy neighbor wasn't going to rattle me. Besides, I figured, she probably meant well in her own way. The trouble started small. At first, it was just little notes left on my door, typed, laminated even. Please refrain from placing tools in view of the street. Kind reminder, garden hoses must be coiled neatly after use. Vehicle must not remain in driveway for more than 48 hours. I shrugged, tossed them in the trash. But something in the tone rubbed me wrong. Not neighborly suggestions, commands, as if I were being watched, judged, like I was a stranger in my own home. One afternoon, as I was hosing down the driveway, I noticed her standing across the street, arms folded, watching, not waving, not smiling, just watching. I nodded. She didn't nod back. Over time, the notes turned into emails. Then came the complaints. A formal letter from the HOA accusing me of code violations I hadn't even heard of, unapproved lawn ornamentation, improper tree trimming techniques. I began to feel like I was on trial for living, and still, I kept my cool. I wasn't going to let some power-hungry neighbor ruin the peace I'd worked 3 decades to earn. But here's where things started to shift. One day, I come home from the hardware store to find bright pink flags planted along the edge of my lawn. At first, I thought it was the city marking utilities. But as I followed the flags, my jaw tightened. They didn't trace any pipes or lines. They cut straight through the middle of my driveway, and standing there, arms crossed, was Karen. Clipboard in one hand, smug look on her face. I walked up and asked calmly, "What's this?" She didn't blink. "That portion of the driveway is on my property," she said. "I'm reclaiming it." At first I laughed, thought she was kidding. She wasn't. She claimed to have original HOA blueprints that proved my driveway overlapped her lot, that the previous owner illegally expanded it years ago and now she was entitled to that land. I told her my deed was clear, my survey was clean, and if she had an issue, she could take it up with the county. She didn't budge. "If you don't vacate that portion of the driveway," she said, "I'll file a formal complaint and pursue legal remedies." Legal remedies. Over a chunk of asphalt. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was scared of losing anything, but because I couldn't believe how far someone would go over something so petty, and how powerless a man can feel in his own home. And if you've ever felt that, if you've ever had your dignity poked and prodded by someone who thinks they can bend the rules to suit themselves, you know exactly what I mean. That tight knot in your chest, that feeling like you're standing on ground that might not hold. And if you're still watching, and any part of this story feels familiar, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but because you know the value of a good man standing up when something's not right. I tell these stories for folks like us, who still believe in fairness, respect, and knowing when to draw the line. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for what happens next, because this wasn't the end, not even close. A week later, I woke up to find traffic cones blocking my driveway, and a handmade sign taped to my garage door that read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was war. I'll never forget that morning. The sky was overcast, the air damp with dew, and the birds were just beginning their song when I stepped out to grab the paper and saw a row of pink surveyor flags stabbed into my front lawn like some sort of invasion had taken place overnight. At first I thought the city might be doing some underground work or utility mapping, but then I spotted her, Karen, standing at the edge of the grass with that clipboard tucked under one arm and a smug expression painted across her face like she'd just won a prize. "Just marking where my property begins," she said without an ounce of doubt or humility, like she was doing me a favor by notifying me. I gave a short laugh, more confused than anything. "Your property?" I asked, trying to keep it light, but she didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. She pointed to one of the flags that pierced through the edge of my driveway and nodded. "This strip here, it's part of my lot. The previous owners of your house paved over it without approval. I've checked the original HOA maps, it's mine." For a second I just stood there stunned. I had all the paperwork. I'd paid a surveyor, out of my own pocket, before signing a single document. The lines were clear. The county approved it. The bank approved it. My deed said that driveway was mine, and I told her that. I explained it plainly, calmly, even pulled up the plot on my phone to show her. But Karen wasn't interested in my facts. She was interested in control. "I've already submitted a formal complaint," she said, turning to walk away. "I suggest you look into your paperwork again before this gets messy." And just like that, she was gone. Like it was all settled in her mind. But it wasn't over. It had just begun. The next morning, I walked outside and found orange traffic cones lined across the top of my driveway, blocking my truck in like it was a crime scene. And taped to my garage door, in large black letters, was a laminated sign that read, "Private property, do not enter." My heart started to pound. Not in fear, but in that deep, slow-burning frustration that comes when someone crosses a line you never thought anyone would dare cross. I ripped the sign down, kicked the cones aside, and called the HOA. I expected reason. I expected someone to say, "Sorry, sir, we'll take care of it." But the woman on the phone seemed more annoyed than concerned. "Karen filed a property dispute," she said. "Until it's resolved, we recommend you don't make any alterations to the area in question." Alterations? It was my driveway. I'd been parking there for months. And now I was being told, politely but firmly, that I shouldn't use my own property. I tried to stay calm. I told myself it would blow over, that the facts would speak for themselves. But over the next few days, things only got worse. Karen escalated. She began taking pictures of my house from the sidewalk, zooming in on the driveway, the mailbox, even my front door. She'd walk past with that same smug look, her phone up, snapping photos like she was building a case for trial. I confronted her once, asked what she was doing. She said, "Documenting evidence," and kept walking. It was surreal. I felt like I was living in a strange sort of nightmare where common sense no longer applied. Neighbors began to notice. Some gave me sympathetic looks. A few avoided eye contact altogether. One old man from across the street, a Navy vet who always watered his roses at 6 a.m., walked over one morning and said, "She's done this before, you know. Last year it was the family at the corner. Said their fence was 2 inches over the line. Made their lives hell until they moved." That hit me like a brick. This wasn't new. This was a pattern. And I'd walked right into it. I tried reaching out to the HOA again, sent emails, submitted a formal complaint of my own. I even attached documents from the county clerk's office proving the property lines. Weeks passed. No response. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down. She put up a second sign, this time staked into the lawn. "Encroachment zone. Under HOA review. I felt humiliated. Neighbors drove by and saw it. Delivery drivers paused, probably wondering what kind of mess I was mixed up in. My own home, my sanctuary, had become a source of anxiety. Every day I woke up, looked out the window, and wondered what she'd try next. Then came the letter. Certified mail. Inside, a cease and desist notice drafted by a lawyer. Karen was threatening legal action if I continued to use the disputed portion of the property. The language was cold, technical, words like easement, trespassing, civil remedies. It was a gut punch, not just because of the legal threat, but because it made everything feel so official, so heavy. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. I was being pulled into a battle I never asked for. I began losing sleep. Every noise outside made me tense. I'd find myself pacing the living room, going over survey maps, questioning everything. Was there a mistake in the paperwork? Did someone in the chain overlook a detail? Could she actually win this? And beneath all that anxiety, a deeper feeling started to fester. Something that cut past the legal nonsense and struck at my core. It was the loss of dignity, the slow erosion of peace. I'd worked too hard for too long to end up in a situation where someone else made me feel like a trespasser in my own home. I'd followed every rule, done everything right. And still, here I was, caught in the crosshairs of someone who twisted the system to serve their own sense of power. It wasn't just unfair, it was deeply wrong. And yet somehow she was getting away with it. Friends and family told me to lawyer up. Some said to let it go, that it wasn't worth the stress. But that didn't sit right with me. Because if you let someone take an inch today, they'll take a mile tomorrow. And if you don't stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it feels hopeless, what kind of example are you leaving behind? That was the question that kept me up at night. That, and the haunting realization I had one morning as I stood at the kitchen window, watching Karen measure the edge of my driveway with a tape measure like it was her personal battlefield. And I realized she wasn't just trying to claim land. She was trying to erase me. I knew calling the HOA was a long shot, but I still had a little hope left that reason might win out, that someone on that board, someone with a bit of integrity, would see the situation for what it was and shut it down. I gathered every document I had, my property deed, the county survey, screenshots of Karen's signs, even pictures of the driveway as it stood when I bought the house, and emailed the board directly. I waited days for a response, then finally got one that read like it had been copied and pasted from a policy handbook. Thank you for your concern. Your complaint has been noted and will be reviewed at the next scheduled meeting. That meeting never came. Or if it did, I wasn't invited. That's when I found out Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a board member. Worse, she wasn't just any board member. She was close friends with at least 3 others. Suddenly, everything made sense. The silence, the indifference, the lack of action. I was trying to fight a system that was already rigged against me, where the referee, the judge, and the opponent were all wearing the same jersey. And that's when the letters started. At first, they looked like the usual HOA updates, white envelopes with the logo in the corner. But when I opened the first one, my stomach dropped. It accused me of encroaching on shared community land and warned me that continued non-compliance could result in fines or further disciplinary action. The next letter accused me of violating HOA landscaping rules because my front hedges extended past the approved boundary line, a line that, according to every survey I owned, didn't even exist. Then came the most gut-wrenching one, a typed letter claiming I had verbally threatened a board member in public, with no date, no time, no witness. Just the accusation. And I knew exactly who that board member was. Karen was creating a paper trail, manufacturing a version of me that didn't exist, a hostile homeowner, a rule breaker, a threat. And little by little, that fiction started to feel real, because people began to believe it. I noticed it first in small ways. The neighbor who used to wave during his morning jog suddenly stopped making eye contact. A woman down the street who once brought me cookies during the holidays crossed to the other side of the road when she saw me walking my dog. I'd lived there just long enough to know their routines, and now they were changing, avoiding me, muttering when I passed. I even overheard a teenager on his bike say to a friend, "That's the guy who's trying to steal Karen's yard." It was surreal. I hadn't changed, but the story around me had. Karen had spun her version of the truth into something tangible, and it was infecting everything. I tried to talk to a few neighbors, clear the air, explain the situation, but their smiles were tight and their responses vague. I could see the fear in their eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of getting involved. Fear of Karen. Because everyone knew she had power, and no one wanted to be her next target. Even the guy across the street, the Navy vet who once warned me, stopped talking to me. He'd nod, but that was it. The damage had been done. The pressure started to get to me. I began questioning every move I made. Was my trash can too close to the curb? Were my porch lights too bright? I felt watched, judged, recorded. I kept blinds closed. I parked farther up the driveway, avoiding the so-called encroachment zone. I went from being proud of my home to feeling like I had to tiptoe around it like an unwanted guest. My own sanctuary had become a minefield. I tried to fight back, hired an attorney, sent a cease and desist letter of my own. My lawyer reviewed everything and assured me I was in the right. Legally, I had the upper hand. But legally and socially are two different worlds when you're dealing with a small community poisoned by rumors and fear. And Karen knew it. She thrived in that space between legal and social pressure, where you can't be sued for gossip but you can ruin someone's life with it. The HOA didn't back down. They started fining me, $50 here, $100 there, for everything from unauthorized driveway use to unapproved modifications, which referred to a garden bed that had been there since before I moved in. I contested each one, but no one ever replied. The fines just kept coming. My mailbox became a source of dread. And one morning, I came outside to find my mailbox itself had been spray-painted with the word thief. That was the moment it hit me. Not just the humiliation, but the realization that I was truly alone. Someone, maybe Karen or someone she'd manipulated, had gone far enough to vandalize my property, and no one saw, no one cared, no one came to ask if I was okay. I reported it, of course, took photos, called the police, filed a report, but without witnesses, without cameras, it was just another act swallowed by silence. I felt like a man drifting further and further from the life he'd worked so hard to build. And worst of all, I could feel something inside me starting to change. I was more guarded, more tired, less hopeful. The man who had once smiled every time he turned into that quiet little cul-de-sac now dreaded pulling into his own driveway. I was losing something more valuable than property. I was losing peace, pride, and trust in the people around me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't possibly spiral any lower, I got a knock on the door. It was a city code enforcement officer. "We received an anonymous tip," he said, holding a clipboard. "There are reports that your garage has been illegally converted into a rental unit." I blinked. "What? No, what are you talking about?" He asked to inspect it. I let him. He walked through, saw nothing suspicious, just a normal garage with some storage boxes and an old workbench, but the fact that he was there at all sent a chill down my spine. Karen had filed another bogus report, trying to bring city pressure into her personal vendetta. It was coordinated harassment, plain and simple. But proving that? That was the trick. That was her game. She never did anything openly illegal. Just enough pressure, just enough whispers, just enough letters and signs to make your life unbearable. And when you snapped, when you pushed back, suddenly you were the bad guy. That night, I sat in the dark, blinds closed, staring at the front yard where it all started, with a few pink flags and a smug smile. I wondered how far she was willing to go. I wondered how many other people she had done this to. How many others had packed up and left just to escape the quiet war she waged behind clipboards and HOA codes. And then, in the middle of all that reflection, I saw her. Karen. Out there. Flashlight in hand, pointing it toward my house, like she was inspecting something, searching for another excuse to strike. And in that moment, something in me snapped. Not in anger, not in rage, but in clarity. Because I realized she wasn't going to stop. Not ever. Not unless I did something she couldn't ignore. And the next morning, I did. I filed a lawsuit, not just against the HOA but against Karen personally, for harassment, for defamation, for property interference. I was done being silent. I was done playing by her rules. And as I handed that stack of papers to my attorney, he looked me in the eye and said, "Good. Because I've seen people like her before. And the only way they stop is when someone makes them." The day I walked into the county records office, I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly. I just knew I needed the truth, not filtered through HOA politics or rewritten by Karen's clipboard fantasies, but the actual, legal truth about my land. The clerk was an older gentleman who seemed to understand what I was going through just by the look in my eyes. He didn't ask many questions, just pointed me to the archives and wished me luck. I spent hours flipping through old plats and property records, comparing them with the documents I had in my folder, squinting at faded blueprints and hand-drawn maps. And then I found it. The original plat map. The official one filed with the county when the development was first built decades ago. It was clean, definitive, and unmistakably clear. My driveway, the entire stretch of concrete that Karen claimed was hers, was well within my property lines. There it was, in ink, that had outlasted every HOA president and overzealous neighbor to ever walk that block. I felt a wave of emotion, relief, anger, validation, all crashing over me at once. But I didn't stop there. I contacted a licensed land surveyor, one with a reputation for being precise and legally airtight. He came out, reviewed the plat, map, and spent hours walking my property, measuring every inch with GPS-calibrated equipment. When he was done, he marked the true boundaries with stakes and paint, and handed me a signed, sealed report. "Your land," he said, tapping the paper. "No question about it." That was the moment I stopped being scared. I had the law, I had the truth, and now I had proof. I took everything, the county map, the surveyor's report, the photos, of Karen's signs and cones, and brought it to an attorney who specialized in property law. His office smelled like old books and fresh coffee, and when he looked over the documents, he gave me a knowing nod. "This is solid," he said. "They messed with the wrong guy." He drafted a cease and desist letter so sharp and deliberate, it might as well have been carved in stone. It named Karen, the HOA board, and the HOA as an entity. It detailed every instance of harassment, cited legal precedent, and demanded that all accusations, fines, and intimidation efforts cease immediately. It also warned that failure to comply would result in legal action. We mailed it with return, receipts and copies sent to the county office. And then I did something I wasn't sure I had the nerve to do, but I knew I had to. I attended the next HOA meeting, the same monthly gathering where they'd pretended my concerns didn't exist. This time, I brought a thick folder of evidence and sat right up front. When they called for public comment, I stood up, looked the board in the eye, and calmly told my story. Not the angry, emotional version, but the factual one, built on maps, surveys, and legal documents. I held up the plat map. "This is from the county office," I said, "filed with the county recorder and available to anyone. It proves that my driveway has always been on my property." I passed around copies of the survey report. This was done by a licensed professional, independently verified. Again, my property. Then I showed them the letters I'd received, the false accusations, the fines, the police report from the mailbox vandalism. "I came here today not to argue, not to accuse, but to clarify, and to ask for accountability. I've been harassed, slandered, and treated like a criminal for simply living in my home." I looked at Karen last. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable, but I didn't need her reaction. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for the truth. And when I finished, the room went silent. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then, from the back of the room, I heard a single pair of hands clapping. Then another, and then a few more. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it didn't need to be. It was enough to feel the energy shift, to see heads nodding, neighbors exchanging glances, the curtain of doubt starting to lift. One man stood up and said, "I think we owe this gentleman an apology." A woman nearby added, "We've all seen how Karen operates. We just didn't want to be next." A few even came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, apologizing for not speaking up sooner, for believing the wrong person. It was like the truth had cracked through a shell of fear that had been hanging over the neighborhood for years. Even the board looked shaken. One member pulled me aside and said he'd be reviewing every complaint Karen had filed in the past year. For the first time in months, I walked home with my head high and my chest clear. But just when I thought, the tide had turned completely, something unexpected happened. A reporter from the local paper reached out. He'd heard about the meeting, about the legal threats, about the chaos in our quiet little neighborhood. "Mind if I ask a few questions?" he said. I hesitated, unsure whether more attention would help or hurt. But then, I remembered how many people had suffered in silence, how many had backed down before, too exhausted or too alone to fight. Maybe this was bigger than me. Maybe it was time someone told the full story, out loud, in print, for everyone to see. And what that article revealed next would change everything. After that meeting, everything changed, but not with fireworks or dramatic confrontations. It was subtle at first. like the slow return of trust after a long storm. The HOA board, perhaps feeling the weight of their own silence, issued a formal "oh" letter not just to me, but to the entire neighborhood, acknowledging their failure to act responsibly and fairly. They cited the evidence I had presented and admitted their oversight. Most importantly, they removed Karen from her leadership position, citing abuse of authority and actions not in alignment with HOA values. There was no grand announcement or public shaming, just a quiet typed letter delivered to every doorstep. Karen, of course, didn't go quietly. She paced her yard on the phone for days, waving her arms, talking about lawyers and retaliation. But this time, nobody listened. Her cones disappeared from my driveway. Her private property signs came down without a word. And for the first time in a long while, my mailbox was empty of threats. But the real transformation came from the people around me. The same neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid me now nodded with respect. A few stopped by to say they were sorry for not speaking up, for believing the whispers. One retired Marine from down the block offered to help reseed the part of my yard that had been trampled. Another brought over a tray of lemon bars and sat with me for an hour, just to talk about anything but property lines. The isolation I had felt for so long began to fade, replaced by something warmer. Community. Or maybe just simple human decency returning to its rightful place. I didn't win a lawsuit, didn't become some kind of neighborhood hero. I was just a man who loved his home and refused to be pushed out of it by someone louder and more connected. What surprised me most wasn't how far Karen had gone. It was how fragile truth can be when no one defends it. One voice, repeating a lie often enough, can turn suspicion into belief. But that same truth, when calmly and clearly presented, has a quiet strength that's hard to ignore. My lawyer called to say that Karen's cease and desist violations could have gone to court, but we both agreed it wasn't worth it. Justice had already been served in the eyes of those who mattered most, the people who lived next door. The reporter from the local paper ended up running a story titled, "The Man Who Drew the Line." It wasn't sensationalized, just facts, interviews, and a quiet reminder that sometimes the person standing alone isn't the troublemaker. They're just the first one to say, enough. After that, I got a few emails from folks in other towns, people dealing with similar HOA headaches, thanking me for showing them that standing up doesn't always mean shouting. It just means staying steady. These days, things are calm. I still mow my lawn, trim my hedges, wave at neighbors walking their dogs. Karen still lives in the neighborhood, but she keeps to herself now. Her power gone, she's just another resident. And maybe that's enough punishment, to live surrounded by the people you tried to manipulate, knowing they see through you now. Sometimes I still walk out to the edge of my driveway and pause. It looks the same. Same cracks, same slope, same paint marks from the surveyor that have long since faded. But it feels different. It's not just a driveway anymore. It's proof. Proof that when you fight not with anger, but with patience, facts, and quiet resolve, you can protect what's yours. You don't need to yell, you just need to stand your ground. And if someone tries to take what's rightfully yours, your peace, your name, your dignity, you meet them with truth, not fear. That driveway may never be mentioned in history books, but for me, it stands as a reminder of something every man deserves to know. You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes strength looks like a man who refuses to be moved, not by lies, not by pressure, and not by fear. And now, every time I pull into my driveway, I don't just see a piece of pavement. I see a quiet kind of victory that speaks for itself. Sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't about fighting harder, it's about standing firmer, holding onto your dignity, and letting the truth do the heavy lifting. No matter how small the issue might seem, when someone tries to take what's rightfully yours, your property, your peace, or your good name, you have every right to push back with honesty and quiet strength. Because justice doesn't always show up in a courtroom. Sometimes it shows up in the silence after the truth is spoken. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of the value of respect, truth, and standing your ground, I'd be honored if you'd hit subscribe, turn on all notifications, and tap like, so you don't miss more real stories that speak to what really matters. And please leave a comment if you've ever had to fight for what's right in your own life. Your voice might be the one that helps someone else find theirs.